What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. I'm in my ESM drip. Shout out to Alex for this. I'm looking good. I'm feeling good. And you know what? I know Drew Lock is feeling good after that 5-touchdown performance. And I know Giants fans, they're not feeling so good after that 5-touchdown performance. New York Giants now picking number 4 in the draft order. But as we sit here in the wake of that Giants win/loss from Sunday, we look ahead to the future, and the future is not that far out. We're talking next weekend. The Giants have their final game of the season, and after that, let's see how these dominoes fall. Will Joe Schoen be retained? Will he be fired? Will Brian Daboll be retained? Will he be fired? That's what we've been speculating for weeks. Now, Alex and I have had our debates. We've played devil's advocate. We've given our takes on it. We've said, hey, clean house. Or we've said, hey, you know what? Maybe the Giants could keep these guys for another year. We'll see how John Mara is feeling, but today it seemed like we got some clarification on the way that John Mara is feeling from a recent report over on Sports Illustrated from Albert Breer saying that John Mara really wants to stay the course here with Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen. So we're going to go ahead and try and unpack that, react to that, give our take on it, and just discuss this a good idea, this a bad idea. How do we feel about the New York Giants potentially opting to stick with Schoen and Daboll in 2025 and beyond? So we'll go ahead and dive into that, waste no more time. Alex, how are you doing today, my friend? And I just want to know what your initial reaction was when you saw that report. You saw Giants trying to stay the course. Now, because I'll kind of like throw this out here, a couple ideas for you to bounce off of. Do you feel like this is kind of Joe Schoen or somebody in the front office reminding people like, hey, there was a vote of confidence issued by John Mara back in October? Or do you think that this is more so maybe John Mara is coming to a decision and opting to move forward with the regime that he currently has?
Man, this is, I wouldn't want to be in John Mara's shoes right now, trying to figure out how to go about this because, going through your fourth head coach and now it would be your third GM. I would not want to be John Mara turning the page, going through the hiring process, doing it all over again because you just cannot get it right. I think he wants to change things. I think he's at the point, and I don't agree with this, and I think that they should bring in a third party to make an objective decision on hiring. But I think John Mara wants to be involved, and not just involved, he wants to be at the forefront of these decisions when it comes to hiring GMs and head coaches, as he always has been. And, with that being the case, I just don't necessarily think he has it in him to do it again. And I think he's like, it doesn't work every time we change things up. We might as well just stay the course and see if maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just not giving them enough time to learn from their mistakes. And the only ounce of optimism I can provide, my friends, is that they've made a hell of a lot of mistakes, and we hope to God that they've learned from them. There's been draft capital spent on players that were not worthy of, we traded up for Deonte Banks, and we traded up for Jalen Hyatt, and there's a lot of players. They took a center in the second round, looking in the past, maybe not the best of practice to take a center in the second round. There's always free agent options available that are super cheap. But with that being said, we liked the picks at the time. I'm not going to lie to you and say, like, oh, I hated them. I liked the selections. But the Giants haven't gotten maximum value out of their talent, and the lack of coaching has been apparent, and the lack of development has been clear. So, do we trust them to draft the quarterback? Do we trust them to trade up and mortgage our future on one? Not necessarily, but, at this moment, if we were going to bring in a new regime, Anthony, and they were going to trade up and get a quarterback, the same amount of risk still applies. There's a possibility that they take the wrong guy, or that they fail to develop that player, or fail to reinstill this culture and galvanize this team. And I think there's a really crazy narrative going around that like people, Giants fans, don't understand that the players want to win. Like, yeah, we wanted to lose last week's game so we could have the number 1 pick and like be able to turn the chapter, have a quarterback. And as Brian Daboll so obviously and evidently put it at the end of last week's win, consistent quarterback play is something the Giants need. And he said, we haven't had consistent quarterback play. And that is the difference between winning and losing, being competitive and not competitive, right? So having that first overall pick gives you a higher probability of getting a quarterback that allows you to have better, competent performance. And I think that's where the Giants have lacked. And now not having that first overall pick complicates those matters. And fans, being smart people, understand that losing was in our best interest. However, a lot of media personnel out there and, just guys attached to the team, like, oh, like these players are never going to give up. They're never going to stop fighting. Nobody is arguing that. Nobody is saying that the Giants should stop fighting and trying to win. That would be egregious. I don't agree with that. If I was a player, I'd be trying to win. My job is on the line. These guys are fighting for their futures. And I can appreciate the fact that they're trying to win. If they were trying to lose and actually tank, Neighbors would be on IR, and so would Drew Lock. And so would Ryan Burns, by the way. they'd have the whole supporting cast on IR. So they've been trying to win. They're just that bad. It's unfortunate to say, but the only thing that we can hope is the mistakes that Joe Schoen made last offseason, and there were quite a few. Letting McKinney go, obviously letting Saquon go was tough, but I think it was the right decision at the end of the day because Saquon was not going to have 2,000 yards with us guys. It just wasn't going to happen. In fact, we might have even won a game or two extra, and that might have been even worse for us.
Well, you know what's funny, though, is you know who thought the Giants should have kept Saquon Barkley, who made the argument to keep Saquon Barkley, was John Mara. And so I kind of want to tie this into a larger discussion because you're talking about all these moves that Joe Schoen has made and these mistakes that he's made. And obviously we're talking about John Mara trying to fix things and get things right. There's been moments over the past several years where the general manager has made a clear and obvious mistake, and John Mara hasn't stepped in and gotten involved and prevented that mistake. And so there is kind of a part of me that feels like, when we were watching Hard Knocks, for example, Alex, and John Mara says to Joe Schoen, hey, I'm going to have a tough time sleeping at night if we let Saquon Barkley leave. I don't want to see him play for Philadelphia, right? He said that. You could argue that if John Mara were a more involved owner and told the GMs what to do, Saquon Barkley wouldn't have 2,000 yards with Philadelphia and would be on the New York Giants. Maybe the Giants would have given him the right offer. And I hate to say it, but like John Mara, he's not the best owner. He makes a lot of mistakes, but perhaps he just has a problem with giving too much power to GMs and trusting the wrong people, which we've talked about before, and a lot of fans agree. Mara trusts the wrong people. It's why he's got too many old friends and family members in the front office, right? We've had this conversation. Maybe Mara is smarter when it comes to football than we give him credit for. And maybe he actually should be more involved, or perhaps there needs to be somebody who has authority over the general manager. I don't know what's in Joe Schoen's contract. I don't know if he has a clause where he has final say on all personnel decisions. That's totally possible. In fact, I actually think, Alex, if you go on the Giants website, he's listed as general manager / vice president of football ops. I think that he is that guy. But what I would argue is that going forward, if the New York Giants do fire Joe Schoen and they bring in a new general manager, that GM shouldn't be GM / VP of football ops. There should be a GM and there should be a VP of football ops. Because I think the problem over the last 10 years with the New York Giants and the way that they failed to build these teams, in my opinion, it's related to the fact that they fail to step in when the general manager makes a bad mistake. And I think there needs to be somebody who's able to oversee what the GM is doing and veto certain moves, because they haven't had that at any point recently. And I think that might actually be a way that John Mara could try to rectify things and fix these mistakes. Because you're right, he's made plenty of mistakes, Joe Schoen's made plenty of mistakes, but how do we prevent these general managers from continuing to be bad? Somebody needs to be able to check them. And John Mara gives general managers full autonomy. He doesn't tell general managers what to do. That's well documented. That's always been the case. Jerry Reese had carte blanche. Dave Gettleman had carte blanche. Joe Schoen has carte blanche. Those guys are allowed to make any move that they want. John Mara perhaps should be more involved, or maybe not him, but maybe somebody else. So what's your thoughts on that, Alex? Maybe the idea of the Giants, if they do move on from Joe Schoen, could they bring in a GM and then bring in somebody above a GM just to kind of not get in the way of the general manager per se, but help oversee his operations and maybe try and guide him in the right direction if the GM is doing the wrong thing?
I mean, listen, I think that the Giants' hierarchy has been quite interesting. There's been a lot of voices that have a say. I mean, Joe Schoen's made decisions. Brandon Brown's, you've heard anonymously comments about Shadur Sanders that are so obviously Brandon Brown to be think that there's some sort of polarizing voice in the front office that, like, do they want Sanders? Do they want Cam Ward? Who's really pulling the strings here? And then, Brian Dable's like, well, what am I supposed to do? We don't have competent quarterback play, and Joe Schoen gave him the worst quarterback room in the NFL. Where the power dynamic is quite interesting because the job of the general manager is to compose a team that your head coach can then coach at a high level, right? That the head coach is not in charge of building the roster. He's in charge of coaching the roster. It is Joe Schoen that's going to the games to watch Shadur Sanders. It is Joe Schoen that's going to watch Cam Ward. It's Joe Schoen going to see a lot of these prospects in person and do these evaluations. Brian Dable has been given a roster that I don't think any real coaching staff could do much with, to be quite honest with you. I mean, we're talking about bad quarterbacks. We're talking about the first 5 rounds of a draft class walking into starting positions. I mean, that's in year 3. I mean, that's an indication that you probably haven't developed much talent. You're looking at a lot of injury-prone play. You're looking at a very, very kind of shallow offensive line where the depth is non-existent. I do think that Brian Dable's been put on the back burner. He has been put in a position where he's had to coach a team that doesn't have much talent, doesn't have any depth really. So when you lose a key starter, you're screwed. When they lost Andrew Thomas, the season ended that day. And we've seen it over and over again. Like, the offensive line was horrible for weeks, and they've been better as of late. But they've been treading water. They had one good game this past week. It's been inconsistent. They've run the ball. They've really gone 3-and-out. They've got really bad quarterback play for most of the season. So, I do think that right now, my most, and I'm going to keep saying it, my most optimistic take is that Joe Schoen has made every mistake in the book. Can he learn from those mistakes? Or are you going to turn the page on a new GM who's going to make more similar mistakes and then have to learn from them, right? Can Joe Schoen learn from himself? Does he have an ego that doesn't allow him to learn from his own mistakes, or is he going to sit back, reflect, talk about the situations that he's put into place, the failed draft capital, the failed free agent signings, the failed development, the failed coaching hires, the lack of, I guess you could say chemistry in that coaching room to begin with? Wink Martindale situation, Mike Kafka, like, there's a lot of bad blood in this coaching staff, let alone trying to keep this culture together in the locker room. So, Anthony, to answer your question, I think that there has to be another voice in there that doesn't have to do with building the roster or coaching the roster, but rather just giving their 2 cents in an objective way. I think that there's a little bit of a power struggle on, like, whose team this really is. Like, is this Joe Schoen's team? Or is it Brian Dable's team? Is John Mara influencing things? Like, there has to be someone that just says, I need to be at the top of this kind of totem pole, overlooking down and making sure the communication is clear. Sometimes I get the sense that communication isn't that clear in the Giants, in their hierarchy of kind of, I guess, status and, GM or head coach of this, because a lot of communication boils down to the level of the field, and it's awful. Like, you're not seeing players do what they were drafted to do. Jalen Hyatt is a speed receiver. Why is he not doing that? You know what I mean? Like, why is he not influencing things in that way? John Michael Schmitz is an incredibly intelligent. He wasn't known for his physical attributes. He was known for his intelligence coming out of college. Why are they not, kind of exploiting that a little bit more strategically? And maybe they are trying to. I'm not sure. But I'm just trying to point out details in players. Deonte Banks is another great example. They went from a very heavy man system to a very heavy zone system, which was not his strong suit. Or maybe it was. But for whatever reason, he's been really struggling this year. And clearly they're not really allocating time to rounding out his strengths and building on his strengths. And he's being exposed a lot for his weaknesses.
The Giants are still playing, just want to clarify on that, they're still playing above the league average rate in man coverage. And
Sure.
I do believe that is why Deonte Banks is still struggling. They are playing more zone than they did last year. Wink Martindale played the most man coverage out of any team. They're not quite at that level anymore under Shane Bowen. They're still playing more man coverage than average. And I do think that ties into a larger point of what you're saying here with how the Giants build their roster, who's involved. Are there too many cooks in the kitchen, possibly? I mean, there's so many different ways to have this conversation. But the Giants' inability to maximize the talents and inability to scout their own talent has been a major problem for years. Whether you're talking about the fact that they have a guy like Deonte Banks, who has historically in college and the NFL struggled in man coverage, playing an excess amount of man coverage, or if you're talking about John Michael Schmitz or Evan Neal and the way that they failed to develop in their blocking schemes, and they've tried new blocking schemes, but they can't seem to fit these guys into the right places. There's been a problem for years with the Giants figuring out what they have on their roster. That's why you have guys like Saquon Barkley. The Giants clearly seem to think that he lost a step. He clearly has not lost a step. You've got guys like Xavier McKinney. The Giants thought, okay, well, you know what? He probably isn't going to be a fit in Shane Bowman's new defense, I guess, so let's let him walk. He's probably reached his ceiling as a player, failing to realize teams around the NFL viewed him as a premium rising star who was only 24 years old and worth paying that money to, and now he's one of the best safeties in football. So I've been saying this for a long time, Alex. I know you agree with me. The Giants don't know how to scout their own talent. They truly don't know who they have on the roster. They overvalue certain players like Daniel Jones. They undervalue other players like Xavier McKinney. They need some sort of internal personnel talent evaluator to ensure that these guys are playing in the right schemes and systems and being valued with the right monetary number relative to their peers around the league. That's one of the biggest issues plaguing the New York Giants roster development, because we always say you have to build through the draft, right? That is of the utmost importance, but it's really difficult to build through the draft when you don't know who you've drafted, when you don't know the talent of the player that's on your roster. That's why you have guys like Julian Love goes to the Seahawks and has career years. You've got guys like BJ Hill gets traded to the Bengals, has career years. The Giants let these guys walk out of the door, or they trade them out of the door, not realizing how talented they truly are. And that's been one of their biggest problems. You can't get ahead like that. You have to know what talent you have on your roster, who to retain, who to send off, and who to extend. You can't just go through and continue to plug guys into the wrong schemes, fail to develop them, and then watch them thrive elsewhere because you didn't understand what you have. So I think that was a good point to bring up, Alex. Wanted to expand on it. I think it's really important, whether it's Joe Schoen and he needs to create a new process or it's a new GM creating a new process, there needs to be a new way of evaluating the New York Giants in-house talent because, hey, you know what? They have found some good players in the draft. They've been able to scout some collegiate talents. They've gotten good value out of some picks here and there. But when those guys get on this roster, for some reason, they significantly lose all of their talent. They lose it all, or they get worse, or they flatline. They get to a point, and then they can no longer grow. That's a problem on the internal development. The Giants need to fix that problem first and foremost.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, okay, so in my opinion, you can go BPA in the first round and pretty much get a player that's going to fit most systems. Usually scheme-specific players aren't drafted in the first round, or the top 10 picks, and the Giants, let's say, oftentimes are drafting in the top 10. The Giants drafted Malik Neighbors knowing he would fit any system that they threw out there. Anything that they did, he would be a star. But that's not the case for every player, right? Jalen Hyatt played an air raid offense at Tennessee. Like, he was not a scheme fit for 90% of the league. You know, like, you needed an offense that was going to be explosive, throw the ball downfield, take these shots. And the Giants did not accomplish that, right? In fact, they did the exact opposite of that. They couldn't throw the ball downfield. They couldn't manage that. They didn't build the offensive line strong enough so Daniel Jones had 20 seconds to make a throw downfield. So I just don't think that, you know, there's a huge communication issue, Anthony, when it comes to who they're drafting and how they're going to use them in game. There's a massive breakdown in where the Giants are taking players and the expectation of how they're going to actually incorporate them into a winning equation, you could say, right? That is a huge, massive communication issue within the Giants organization. But most of all, it's a problem of poor coaching. It's a problem of coaching overturn. And it's a problem of taking responsibilities away from people, right? Brian Daboll said, oh, Mike Kafka, you're not doing a good job. I'm taking your responsibilities away from you. Well, you want to know something, Brian Daboll? You had a worse points per game average this year than Mike Kafka did last year. You know what I mean? And they didn't have Neighbors last year. They had Saquon Barkley last year. So interesting kind of correlation, but I don't think it's anything to be said. I think it's more so just like injury, and even the offensive line was worse last year. Honestly, you could argue that this roster this year is better than last year's, on offense. So, there's a real argument to make about that. And I do think that right now, the Giants have kind of disrespected some of their coaches internally. They took Mike Kafka's responsibilities away. They covered it up with an assistant head coaching job, which is complete BS. Like, it's like I haven't heard of Mike Kafka's name spoken in like 4 months, Anthony. I don't even know, like, he is not even on the radar anymore. He was a head coaching candidate last year. The Giants have killed that man's stock at a level that I've never seen. He went from head coaching candidate to like special teams assistant in a year. Like, that's how far down the totem pole he fell. So my biggest concern with the Giants is kind of, can they convince anyone to come in here that's going to help them revitalize this team? And if you keep Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, you better ask Joe Schoen. And if I'm John Mara, I'm going to Joe Schoen and saying, what is your plan? Are you keeping Shane Bowen because our defense looked pretty bad this year? Are you keeping Mike Kafka? Because I think he's going to walk. I mean, his contract's over. So who are you bringing in to be your assistant, your offensive coordinator? Is he going to take over play calling? Is Dable going to retain that? Who's going to develop your, I'd be asking these questions. And right now, Joe Schoen probably doesn't have many answers for him. So that's where I'd be kind of sitting here like, if you don't have any answers, how am I supposed to keep pushing forward? And they clearly need an upgrade in coaching because, like I was saying, the communication breakdown has been evident from how they translate draft capital and free agents to the football field.
Yeah, that's one example of it. But it's also, I just want to highlight the fact that we would be talking about Brian Daboll going into his third season as a head coach, overturning the OC position and DC position a second time each. That's kind of ridiculous and insane. You want continuity. That's one of the arguments for keeping Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, right, Alex? We want to maintain continuity. how much continuity are you truly maintaining if you need a new defensive coordinator this upcoming offseason and a new offensive coordinator? That's not a lot of continuity. So at that point, if you're overturning that much of the defensive coaching staff, that much of the offensive coaching staff, because of course, new DC and new OC, those guys are going to want to bring in their own guys as well. So you have to fire other guys and bring in new guys. So if that's what you're talking about, how much continuity are you truly maintaining by keeping Brian Daboll in the first place? And if that's the domino effect of keeping Daboll is firing all of these other guys, why not just start over and bring in a new head coach? And if you're at that point, why not just bring in a new GM? So that's kind of where I just keep falling back to. There really is no semblance of continuity going forward. There is no way to carry over what happened to 2024 and reapply it to 2025. Because everything that could have went wrong in 2024 went wrong. It was a disaster year. You need to throw it in the trash bin, set it on fire, and start from scratch. That's where the Giants are. So if you are going to hold over coaches from last year, you know that you have to change other coaches from last year as well. So how can you possibly move forward with any sort of continuity, any sort of ground to stand on with a solid foundation? You really can't. And so it's a complete mess for the New York Giants. John Mara has a lot of difficult decisions to make, and I know he doesn't want to fire more people once again. It's been too soon since the last firings, but at the end of the day, guys are getting fired this year anyway. There's no way this entire 100% coaching staff is going to be retained. You have to make changes underneath Brian Daboll. And if you're getting to that point, and you maybe need to make changes in the front office as well, you're just getting closer to the inevitable of cleaning house. And if you're not doing it this year, the odds of you doing it next year are very likely. And I'd rather just get it done and over with, get the rebuild started sooner rather than later, because the longer you kick the can down the road, the longer you wait to do the dirty things, the more ugly they become. And that's what has happened to the Giants in recent years. They've kicked the can down the road for far too long. They didn't want to move on from Daniel Jones because they wanted to try and make it work. They kicked that can down the road. 6 years later, it really burned them. $140 million contract later, it really burned them, right? And you've got plenty of other examples of that. Whether you're talking about Dave Gettleman getting too long, or now we're at the point where we haven't really gone through a real rebuild, Alex. We've gone through several head coaches and GMs, but none of those GMs have been willing to blow up the roster and truly rebuild. You had the infamous line of Dave Gettleman saying you can win and rebuild at the same time. You have the infamous line from this past bye week of Joe Shane saying we're not that far off. We're rebuilding, but we're close. And they're still trying to contend. You can't do it that way, truly. And I know what else is a GM going to say is going to be the immediate counterpoint. But what else is the GM going to do is what I'm trying to see, because everything the Giants have done, they've acted like a win-now team for the last 6 years. And they haven't been a win-now team for the last 6 years. They're a team that needs to rebuild. And I don't think Joe Shane is willing to rebuild with his back against the wall going into 2025. So again, the longer you kick the can down the road, the more difficult this becomes. You have to just blow it up, start over, and start from scratch. A true rebuild. And I don't know what a better moment that you could have that happen than right now. Like, if a 10-game losing streak and a 3-16 or 3-14 finish to the season isn't enough to finally convince you that you need to blow it up and rebuild, I don't know what will. So if that's really not going to be convincing enough for John Mara, expect him to kick the can down the road another year, expect another year of mediocrity or worse, and expect them to probably get it wrong once again in the following offseason, because this is the most obvious moment. This is the time to rebuild. Blow it up and start from scratch. If you're not willing to do it now, when will you be willing to finally go through a proper rebuild?
Yeah, I mean, listen, want to play devil's advocate and try to come up with a positive spin here, at least just to see if I can convince myself to not cry when they keep Joe Shane and Brian Daboll. But this is going to be my best attempt, and I'm going to repeat it again just to start. Learn from your mistakes, Joe Shane. Learn from your mistakes, Brian Daboll. I will say this. I think we've seen Brian Daboll have flashes of there's offense there. There's his play calling isn't bad. I don't hate Brian Daboll's play calling. He's just the team just can't execute the plays because you have a different quarterback in there every week. Drew Lock, Tommy, one-legged Daniel. You just keep going flip-flop. You're not going to have consistency, right? But how many deep passes have we seen the quarterbacks miss? How many reads or open receivers have we seen miss? How many drops have we seen from the receivers, right? This offense, I don't get the sense the play calling is horrible, right? That's not really what I see when I watch the Giants. I watch a really undisciplined team. And the reason that I think they're so undisciplined is because they're so young and inexperienced and injury prone. Like, you have so many guys in the offensive line out all the time. You don't have many veteran leaders. You really need to bring in somebody that's going to, I mean, look, a quarterback fixes a lot for you, but you look at, like, for example, take a look over at, like, the Commanders and what they have with Jaden Daniels, right? And you guys know I loved Jaden Daniels coming out of the draft. I would have done anything for the Giants to get him, but of course it wasn't possible. But Anthony, what I think is great for that team, think about the leadership they have on that offensive side. Terry McLaurin, Austin Eckler, they have some really, really good Zach Ertz. They have tremendous amount of veteran experience and leadership at multiple position groups. On the defensive side, they had Marshawn Lattimore, who they acquired this season, Bobby Wagner, and Daron Payne, and a couple of tremendous interior defensive guys. You know, they have a really, really strong veteran core of leaders. And it kind of takes me back to, like, the culture aspect of this. Building your culture and, like, this whole narrative that people are spewing, or, like, specific people are spewing on social media that this was a culture win, like they needed this for the culture. It's total bullshit, guys. It's total bullshit. I mean, look, we remember what happened last year. They won 3 games. You want to know what happened? We let Saquon Barkley and Xavier McKinney walk, 2 of our biggest leaders. What did it do for our culture? Our general manager let 2 of our biggest leaders that were a part of that culture leave in free agency. You know what I mean? Our GM does not care about the culture of this team because he has done the opposite at every single time to galvanize this team and add veteran leadership at key position groups. So, with that being said, Joe Shane's got to learn from that. He has to reflect on last offseason and say to himself, all right, I let too many leaders go. I got to keep somebody here. I got to keep somebody that's going to be a piece. You know, I think Darius Slayton is one of those guys, but I think that he wants to leave now because of how they kind of went about Daniel Jones. And obviously he hasn't got a lot of targets. He could probably go to a better team and have a better, maybe sign a 1-year deal and, you know, kind of compound that into a more lucrative contract with another squad. But the Giants need to bring in some leadership, some guys that are going to hold it down, and they're going to have to overpay for it. You know, Anthony, that's what you have to do when you're a bad football team. You have to overpay for leaders and good players. Like DJ Reed, love DJ Reed. I think he would be a perfect fit in the secondary here, but we're going to have to overpay for him because he doesn't want to go to another losing team. He wants to go to a winning team. You know what I mean? So if you want to get him, you're going to have to give him over market value. You want to bring in another offensive lineman, or you want to bring in another receiver like a T. Higgins, you're going to have to overpay because T. Higgins is going from one of the most lucrative, explosive offenses in the game to one of the worst. So you're going to have to overpay for these guys, and that's just the way that it goes when you're a bad football team. But I don't care about spending. I care about the right decisions and the personnel decisions that we have to make here. If you trade up and get your quarterback, now you have a quarterback on a rookie contract. Now you can overspend on a couple of players that are going to help you improve those specific variables. I would go get DJ Reed, go get T. Higgins, get both those guys. I don't care. Backload their contracts. T. Higgins is going to be a great leader for your receiver room. He's going to help you maximize Malik Neighbors, who's going to take attention away from the cornerback and secondaries. DJ Reed's going to do unbelievable work for a guy like Deonte Banks, taking a stupendous amount of pressure off of him, helping him improve. DJ Reed knows the New York media market. Like, I would overpay for those 2 guys. And it doesn't just have to be those 2 guys. You could say Charvarius Ward's another option. You could throw in other players here if you want to. But I think the Giants have to overpay on a couple guys, because if they go and trade for a quarterback and reset that rookie quarterback window, you have money to spend. Like, you got it. You have to spend now. And listen, those contracts are going to expire before your rookie quarterback ends up heading free agency anyway, the guys that you sign long term. So you spend on those monies because you have to do it. And then you get those big guys, you get those guys in their prime, they're going to really impact your team. And then you start rebuilding through the draft. And you keep adding picks, use your mid-round picks, and you start developing your scheme. You start adding players to fit your system. Why do teams succeed? Anthony, why do the Rams somehow so competitive every year, both offensively and defensively? Well, because they draft guys to fit their system. They draft guys that play a specific role. Why were the Patriots so good under Bill Belichick? Well, he drafted guys that were horrible everywhere else they went, except for when they played on the Patriots. Remember Nate Solder? Dude was like one of the best left tackles in the game. He went to the Giants and he was horrible because he fit a specific scheme there. The dropbacks that Tom Brady had were a lot more shallow, and he was able to push defenders around, right? Like, this is this is like you watch how other teams operate and their coaching. There's a lot of really good symmetry and synergy and chemistry between their drafting, their personnel decisions, and what you see on the football field. There is literally zero chemistry, synergy, or chemistry with who the Giants are drafting and what they're putting on the football field. So I think that they have to be a lot more efficient in that category, and that starts with finding the coaches that you can build around long term and not alienating them and not taking their responsibilities away at the first glimpse of regression. You know what I mean? You have to commit to a system. And yeah, that does sound like we should commit to Brian Dable or Joe Shane. But the main reason I think they should be fired now is because, as you said earlier, Anthony, I think that was a really good point that you made. They're not going to be able to convince any other good coaches to come here. If you clean slate right now and give a new regime, new head coach, new GM the authority to bring in their guys with their connections, you can lock those guys in and really start to set the tone, set the culture. People may want to come here because of the connections that those new guys have. But after knowing what the Giants have done to the current guys, the current regime with Mike Kafka and Wink and all the guys that have taken steps in the wrong direction. Brandon Brown was was a GM was about to be at GM next year. I don't think he's even in the running anymore. You know what I mean? He may not be at one of the top guys. So, Anthony, I think they have to clean house because they'll be able to convince good coaches to come here, and they'll be able to set a foundation that they can foster development, culture, and growth. But right now, you fire Shane Bowen, Mike Kafka leaves. Who's coming here, man? I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned our coaching's going to be weak because we can't convince good coaches to come here anymore.
I think our coaching staff is already weak. So, yeah, it's only going to get weaker. But you're right. I mean, that was evidenced by the fact that Shane Bowen was fifth option. I mean, the Giants went through how many interviews and then eventually settled on Shane Bowen? At least that's how it looked to us from the outside looking in. Listen, man, the Giants, the outside looking in isn't good, and the inside looking out can't be too pretty either. I fear that the Giants have just completely lost their way and direction. But you know what? We do have one game left on the schedule. The Giants are coming off of a good culture win, I guess. And then they've got this final game left to play. And then John Mara is going to have those meetings with Joe Shane and Brian Dable, and he's going to decide, do we want to move forward or do we not? And, of course, that's going to be a really interesting decision, and we're going to continue to break that down as we lead up to that decision and, of course, react to the fallout of whichever decision John Mara makes. And, of course, we're going to be updating you guys on all of that right here on Fireside Giants. So, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, catch you all on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.